So, what are Android Vitals? Let's start with the basics. For those of you who are not familiar with it, Android Vitals is a dedicated section of the Google Play console that brings together 15 engineering metrics that we at Play have determined have the greatest impact on end user experience. Because these metrics are sourced from real devices in the hands of real users in the real world, Vitals is a powerful tool to help you understand the performance and quality of your app in the wild. Now, I mentioned that these are engineering metrics, but I want to make a really, really important point. Although these are critical metrics that any technical team would without a doubt want to take a look at, we present the data in such a way that it should be digestible by any member of your organization, from engineers and product managers to marketers and BD leads and execs. Indeed, we designed Vitals to be a free, out-of-the-box, universal dashboard to help anyone in your organization quickly assess your app's technical performance. And it's exactly because of how accessible and powerful the information presented in Vitals is that we've seen incredible adoption from developers. Indeed, though we launched the product only a little over 2 years ago, we've already had over 100,000 developers engage regularly with the platform. That all sounds nice, but I'm sure you're thinking, okay, great, but what information exactly does Android Vitals show? And more importantly, why should I care? Fair enough. So for those of you who've never used Android Vitals, or for those of you, fair enough. So for those of you who've never used Android Vitals, or for those of you who maybe haven't visited in a while, let me give you a brief overview of what you'll find in Android Vitals today. At a high level, Android Vitals is organized around 5 major performance areas. We have stability, which includes key data like crash rate and app not responding or ANR rates. Battery, which focuses on app behaviors that we know negatively impact device battery life. That's things like stuck partial wake locks and device wake-ups. Rendering, which shows indicators of jank and device wake-ups. Rendering, which shows indicators of jank and slow rendering and frozen frames. And at I/O last year, we introduced 2 all-new performance areas, startup time and permissions. And I'll speak to each of those specifically in a little bit more detail in just a minute. Across those 5 different performance areas, we have a total of 15 metrics. And each of those metrics can be broken down by at least 3 dimension metrics. And each of those metrics can be broken down by at least 3 dimensions, including APK version, Android OS version, and device, allowing you to drill down to a really granular level to understand your app's performance, and perhaps more importantly, to troubleshoot performance areas when issues are identified. Now, in addition to the plethora of metrics we provide to allow you to go really deep on app performance, at I/O last year, we launched a number of features spanning across the Vitals platform to make your data more insightful and actionable. These include category benchmarks, anomaly detection, and the concept of core vitals. So since many of you will already be familiar with the basics of Android Vitals, I particularly want to highlight some of these new features that we've made available on the platform. So the first feature up is a new performance area known as App Startup Time. So we introduced this section because we know that users expect quick starts no matter when the app was last launched. To help you assess that, we introduce metrics for each of the 3 system states and measure how long it takes to render the first frame of your app. But perhaps more importantly, because it's sometimes hard as a developer to define what's truly quick, we hear that all the time. Developers want to know, how do I stack up relative to my competitors? What's good? What's bad? We analyze the body of apps in the Play Store and then define different thresholds for a slow startup based upon the original device state. So for example, for a slow cold start, we define it as 5 seconds or more. For a slow warm start, that's 2 seconds or more. For a slow hot start, that's 1.5 seconds or more. This is just another way that we're trying to make the data in the vital section of the console more intelligible. So now with a single glance, you can quickly answer the question of, is my app starting up fast enough? The second performance area that we added recently is known as app permissions. So as you know, on Android, users have to grant explicit permission to your app to perform a host of activities, such as accessing device location, writing to local storage, or reading device contacts. Without those permissions, your app can be limited in its ability to perform business case critical operations. Recognize the importance of this, we introduced critical operations. Recognize the importance of this, we introduced permission denial rates to help you understand how often are users denying your permission requests and which requests specifically are getting flagged. This information is critical in helping you to assess whether you are delivering enough value and/or providing significant explanation of that value to justify user acceptance of that permission. In addition to those two new performance areas that we introduced recently, we also introduced a number of features spanning across the entire Vitals platform that are designed to make the information more relevant and actionable. These enhancements were almost all direct responses to feedback that we heard from you, our developer community. The first feature is known as category benchmarks. So we heard from many of you, that while it was valuable to see how your app's performance stacked up against the Play ecosystem as a whole, you were even more interested to see how you stacked up against your direct competitors. So with that in mind, we introduced category benchmarks. So now through its simple dropdown in any of the Vitals performance areas, you can easily compare your performance for any metric to others in your store category. In fact, you can choose to compare yourself to any category in the store. We know that different categories in the store have vastly different performance metrics. So we think this feature will give you a better sense of how your app truly stacks up against the competition. Another request that we've heard frequently from you, the developer community, was that you wanted to be made aware when there were sudden changes in important metrics. This is where we introduced anomaly detection, another key launch from last year's Google I/O. So with anomaly detection, we now alert you whenever there is a sudden change in a critical vital metric like crashes or ANR rate. We not only surface this information prominently in warnings on the Vitals homepage, but even better, you can now sign up to receive automated email warnings so you'll never miss an important regression. And I want to highlight, this is one of those key features that if you're not actively using it today, you should take some time immediately after this call, or even while I'm talking over the next few slides, to go in and sign up for anomaly detection alerts. They're that important. To be honest, So the final major feature that we launched recently was known as Core Vitals. This was also in response to another piece of recurring feedback that we heard from you. Namely, that although you appreciated our continued iteration and expansion on the Vitals platform, you sometimes found it difficult to know which metrics to prioritize. To address this, we introduced that concept of Core Vitals and effectively made that decision easy for you. With Core Vitals, we identified the 4 metrics that our data tell us have the greatest impact on end user experience. Specifically, the stability metrics of crash rate and ANR rate, and the battery metrics, excessive wake-ups, and stuck partial wake locks in the background. And we display those metrics prominently at the top of the Vitals landing page. Moreover, for each of those metrics, we show your app's performance relative to a bad behavior threshold to help you quickly assess if your app's performance is accessible. Finally, if your performance rises above the threshold for any app release, we'll display a prominent warning at the top of the Vitals landing page. For those of you outside of the product and engineering worlds, I know that we've got a number of folks on the call today who are marketers or maybe BD leads. If you have not yet had a chance to engage with Android Vitals, Core Vitals is the perfect place to start. If you go into the Android Vitals, Core Vitals is the perfect place to start. If you go into the Android Vitals section of the console and your app is above the bad behavior threshold for any of these Core Vitals, you should be having a discussion with your product teams because at these levels, your app's technical performance is likely impacting your business success. Now, let me talk about some of our truly latest features. These are truly the latest and greatest that we introduced just at the end of last year. So one of the top pieces of feedback that we've been hearing from you is that you loved Android Vitals for identifying problems, but you sometimes struggled to effectively debug the underlying issues once identified. Well, at our Playtime Developer event last fall, we launched a new feature that should make this process significantly easier. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Android Vitals helps you track the performance of your app in the real world. But in addition to Android Vitals, we also have another free out-of-the-box tool known as pre-launch reports, also in the console. Free out-of-the-box tool known as pre-launch reports, also in the console, which can help you identify issues in your apps before you push them to production. So while they're in alpha or beta tracks. Now, these pre-launch reports work by running your app on real devices situated in the Firebase Cloud Test Lab, automatically navigating through the apps, capturing screenshots, exceptions, and logs as they go. Now, because this testing occurs in a controlled environment, we're able to capture a lot more metadata for crashes that occur in these PLR executions. Now, wouldn't it be great in these PLR executions? Now, wouldn't it be great if you could go straight from a real-world crash identified by Android Vitals to that same crash in PLR with all of its associated metadata? Well, now you can. With our introduction of Vitals and PLR linking, now you can. With our introduction of Vitals and PLR linking, whenever a real-world crash in Android Vitals was also seen during a PLR execution, you'll now get all the extra metadata available to you in Android Vitals so you can debug more effectively. What's even better is that this is not a one-way connection. Indeed, we've linked pre-launch reports and Android Vitals in both directions. So now we've linked pre-launch reports and Android Vitals in both directions. So now if a crash occurs in pre-launch reports that is already happening in the real world, you'll be informed and you'll be able to jump from PLR to Vitals to see the current real-world impact of the crash. We think this will help you to be able to better prioritize the issues that are highlighted in pre-launch reports because you'll know which issues are affecting users right now. So hopefully I've helped provide a better understanding of what exactly Android Vitals is and some of the ways we've worked over the past year to make it more insightful and actionable. But the bigger question remains, why should you care? Well, because we leave all the really hard questions at Google's for the product managers to solve, I'm now going to hand things back over to Fergus to speak to the importance of app performance and the gains we're seeing across the platform. Take it away, Fergus.
Thanks very much, Joel. Hey everyone, my name is Fergus Hurley, as Joel mentioned, and I'm the product manager for Android Vitals. And I'm really excited to be able to have this time with you, to be able to share some of the lessons we've learned over the last nearly 2 years now of working with developers to improve their Android Vitals. And hopefully you can take away some lessons here that you can be able to use in your company and yourself. And so we're going to just jump straight in here. One sec, I'm going to present. Okay, great. So we all know that performance is really important. And one of the ways we can clearly show its importance is when we look at the reviews that people write on the Play Store. So we built machine learning pipelines to be able to extract what are the topics people are talking about in reviews. And if you go to the reviews analysis section, extract what are the topics people are talking about in reviews. And if you go to the reviews analysis section of the Play console, you can see the topics we've extracted for your application. But We did another analysis where we looked across all 1-star reviews in the store. And what we found is when we're able to extract a topic, 42% of the time, people are talking about stability and bugs. On the other side, when we saw users talking about things in the 5-star reviews, we find that the vast majority of the time, they're talking about speed, design. We find that the vast majority of the time, they're talking about speed, design, and usability. So this just shows if you really want to be able to improve your retention and monetization, you should focus on these performance metrics because they're directly driven by these things. We'll come back to that later. But let's look at if you want a 5-star rating. Well, what we found is that over the past 2 years, nearly working on Vitals, that from 2017 to 2018, we saw changes happening in the mentions of these topics. And what we found is that in the 5-star reviews, we see an increase in users talking about speed, design, usability, because developers are focusing on those more. And we saw a drastic decrease in users talking about stability and bugs and resource usage being battery and other performance related to on-device usage like memory, etc. So we're going to jump in and look at what we think contributed to this drop in stability and bugs to start off with. Here's a quote from the Merge Dragons team, which is a very popular Zynga game. And they were able to reduce their 1-star reviews by over 50% as a result of using Android Vitals. And this is because they were able to pinpoint where exactly in the app users were actually having an issue. The Taps Games team were able to use Android. The Taps Games team were able to use Android Vitals to be able to identify a specific cluster of devices that were causing a huge ANR issue. And they were able to reduce their ANR rate by 80% down to 0.2% as a result of using Android Vitals. And as you can see here in the quote, they say, using only the information in Android Vitals dashboard, they were able to solve the problem. Most other performance tools out there do not report on ANRs. And this is where the app stops responding. And these are major issues for users and clearly associated with your application. So really important. These are major issues for users and clearly associated with your application. So really important to pay attention to. Next one is a quote from Reddit here, where they reduced their crash rate by 75%. And what they found most valuable in Vitals is the feature that Joel mentioned earlier, which is the benchmarks. So this enables the developers to be able to see how they are actually comparing with the other apps that are similar to them. And Reddit was able to assure their team and leadership that they are one of the most stable apps out there, and initially be able to make the case for investing in that area because of the benchmark that they were able to see. Moving on to a quote here from Lovu. Now they opted in to the anomaly emails that Joel mentioned, and if you are not, already signed up for those anomaly emails, I'd encourage you and your entire engineering team on Android to sign up for those email alerts because they are being proven to be very useful for many developers now at this point, both very large and small. And we can see here that the Lovu team experienced an ANR rate increase of 94%, and then was able to quickly disable an ads SDK that was causing that issue and reduce their ANR rate again. After shipping an updated version to the actual APK. And another important point to realize from this one here is that oftentimes it's not you as the app developer that might introduce this issue, but you might have these third-party libraries that you depend on that might introduce an issue that you might not be aware of, and that these anomaly alerts can inform you when there is an actual issue. The ABA English team is not a huge team, and they don't have enough resource to have a full team focused on Android performance. But what they decided to do instead was to dedicate 1 quarter to actually fixing their Android Vitals issues. And in that quarter, they saw their ANR rate drop by 97%. And they associate this to actually increasing their rating drastically. From users. And you will never get a 4.6 star rating by only focusing on your vitals. But I definitely can assure you that you will never get a 4.6 star rating if you have terrible vitals. So developers who had a large increase in their usage of vitals saw a 50% reduction in crash rates in the second half of last year. And that resulted in an improved experience for 3 billion active installs of APKs, which is pretty incredible. So we're pretty happy with that, and we hope that you can contribute to an even larger gain in 2019. So that gain is from last year. Why should you care about it if you haven't focused on it up until now? Well, here's another analysis we did of 1-star ratings. This is more than just the reviews. This is looking at the ratings, which not every rating has a review. But when we look at the ratings, what we find is that users who experience a high ANR rate leave 22% more 1-star ratings, and users with a high crash rate leave 52% more 1-star ratings. And so if you want to be able to improve your rating of your application, really trying to make sure that none of your users have a high ANR or crash rate, really important. So now we're going to jump into resource usage. As I mentioned earlier, this is related to battery and memory usage, etc. And we report on many of these metrics in the Play console. One of the metrics we report on is excessive wake-ups. And the CTO of JAMO wouldn't have even noticed or been able to fix their excessive wake-ups issue without using Android Vitals. Android Vitals is one of the few tools out there that reports on the battery consumption of applications. And what you'll notice when you go into the battery section, it'll enable you to be able to see some metrics that are very interrelated. So some of the metrics include ones related to network, which is bad for users in multiple ways because you're consuming their network, like their mobile data, which they might have pay-as-you-go plan. Which they might have a pay-as-you-go plan with not much mobile data to begin with. And if you're having excessive network usage that's using up their mobile data, it's also wasting their battery. And there's many other metrics involved in the battery section. We will only surface the metrics in the battery section that are relevant to you. So if you do not use wake-ups at all, then you will not see that metric in the battery section of Android Vitals. Okay, now jumping into how do you get a 5-star rating and what have developers done to be able to increase their rating. So the Mercado Libre team, which I think is the largest e-commerce app in South America, was able to use Android Vitals to be able to look at the permissions. As Joel mentioned, this is a new feature that we launched at I/O last year. And what they found is that when they added this new feature that required a permission, they did it in a way that was resulting in a very high denial rate from users, primarily because they weren't providing a reason for requiring that permission. And when they adjusted their strategy and redesigned it, they saw their permission denial rate go way down because users saw the value in the feature and were approving it when they needed to. Another quote we got from Mercado Libre team is that when they were working as a large organization where they have many, many different teams working on the same application, it was very useful for them to use Vitals to be able to identify when a regression occurred in the application. So what they found is that the startup Vitals showed them that one of the teams had introduced a problem with their cold start. resulting in more users experiencing a slow cold start, which is where the app takes more than 5 seconds to load. And using Android Vitals, they saw this. We were able to work with the team that was responsible for this, that was not aware of introducing the issue, to actually then end up fixing the issue and to ship a much faster application for their users. Here's a quote from Lavu, where they talk about tracking their startup time. So we looked into our Android Vital startup time metrics and also checked startup time. So we looked into our Android Vital startup time metrics and also checked the corresponding numbers from Firebase. The results indicated that on startup time has led to us a schedule of major rewrite. And so what you see here is that they were able to determine, using Android Vitals and Firebase, what was actually wrong with it and be able to invest in that area moving forward. What we find, developers often wonder why they should use Firebase Performance Monitoring and Android Vitals. Let me explain a little bit about that. So Android Vitals is based on platform level data that's collected. So this is where users, when they first sign up for an Android phone, they are asked whether they would like to share some of their device diagnostics and usage data with Google and our partners, you app developers. And then if they agree to that, then they will have their crash rates and other metrics collected. But developers can also include the Firebase Performance Monitoring SDK in their application, which will track specific events in the application that developers can actually trigger themselves, and then be able to understand much more in depth where in the application the issues are occurring. And so both are complementary, Android Vitals and Firebase Performance Monitoring. Android Vitals is sort of your starting point to be able to understand if you have an issue in the first place. And then Firebase Performance Monitoring really helps you debug those issues. And that's what Lavu did here. So I've covered some different case studies here with different titles of people. And you'll see some from Android engineer, head of mobile engineering, product manager. And these are the people you'd expect to be actually talking about performance and be interested in that area. And before, it was very hard for them to get that data. Now it's much easier as a result of Android Vitals. And one of the things that we are most proud of, though, as part of Android Vitals, is that we now have a whole nother group of people within app companies using these engineering metrics. And so we see case studies from the lead mobile product manager, the CTO, the VP of product, and even COOs talking about performance of their application from a technical perspective. And one of the key reasons for this, we believe, is that quality across the Android ecosystem is increasing. And if you and your company are not looking at the quality of your application, then you're going to get left behind. Great. I'm going to just jump into a demo now, where I'm going to show Android Vitals. So here we are in the Android Vitals product, where you can see Core Vitals at the top called out. And this is for the Google Santa Tracker application. It's a popular app in December, not so popular in June and July. But here we can see that they have a crash rate that's above the bad behavior threshold. And so it's called out with red here. And you can go down here and you can see that, so it's called out with red here. And you can go down here and you can see their ANR rate, which is another core vital, but it's below the bad behavior threshold. So they're doing well there. On the crash rate, they have a crash rate for the last 30 days of 1.42%. And previous 30 days was 1.91%. So they've gotten better over the last 30 days. But they're still above the bad behavior threshold here. And so we can hover over here to be able to see information about this bad behavior. So we can see here that for ABK 5.3.1, they are above the 1.09%. If we scroll down here, we can see all vitals. They are not using any of the wake locks or wake ups metrics or functionality. And so they do not have that data exposed here. And so then we look at stability, app startup time, and rendering. And so we can see here, if we go into the crash rate section, we can see that their benchmark here shows them that they are doing better than 26% of the other apps in their category, which isn't great. Percent of the other apps in their category, which isn't great. We want them to be doing much better than that. Release gives them context to how bad they're doing. Then you can go down and see the crash rate over time, and you can click to show the confidence interval here, and you can see it's pretty wide there. We can switch to different time spans here. So let's look at the last 3 months rather than just the last 30 days, because it's been just over a month since Christmas. If we click to show the confidence interval again, you can see that it's actually very wide in November. It gets tighter in December, and we're much more confident actually around Christmas Day, which makes sense because there's more users using the application at that time. You can go down here and you can see it broken down by app version, by device, and by Android version. And you can see here that this version is in production and is the version we were flagging earlier. And you can then be able to select one of these APKs. We can see that this version here was much higher in terms of impacted sessions, so 2.71%, much higher in terms of impacted sessions, so 2.71%. And so we can click on that one and we can see what happened with the crash rate of that one. And you can see that the crash rate went very high with that app version, but they shipped a fix. And you can see here, if you hover over it, the rollout of the different releases. And you can also see the percentage of rollout of those releases. Great. So if we go back up here, we can switch to seeing all APK version codes. And we can click in and go to view the crashes. And this brings us to the ignores and crashes section. And here you can see the filtered now. And this brings us to the ignores and crashes section. And here you can see the filtered now by the last 7 days for that APK version, and for all the APKs that were installed by Play directly. And you can see the clusters that we've identified of crashes that happen for that APK version. And so we can click in to one of those APK versions. And then you can be able to see more information to be able to help you debug that crash. So you can see it's just actually only happened to that APK version. It's only happening on Android 8.0, and it's mostly happening on Android 8.0, and it's mostly happening on Samsung devices. And then you can go down and you can see the stack traces to actually help you be able to debug that crash. If you go back here, you can then go into another one, and you can see that this one actually is occurring on different Android versions to the other one, and this can help you also debug. Great, so that's sort of a quick overview of the Android Vital section as it exists today. I'm going to switch back over to the Q&A now. So Joel, you want to take it away?
Sounds good. Thanks, Fergus, for the business overview as well as the demo. I know everyone obviously likes to see the console in action. So we've actually got a good number of questions. And for those of you who weren't on at the top of the session, just a reminder that below the live stream, there is a link to submit questions. So please, as we go the live stream, there is a link to submit questions. So please, as we continue to answer some of the questions that have already come in, if a question pops up, comes to your mind, please send it our way. We do our best to answer it. I also know some folks may be having some audio issues, so I apologize for that. We're trying to get those resolved, but hopefully we can get you the information, as much information as we can. So some of the questions one question that came up a couple times, I'll read the first one off here. There's two that are related. It says, for better monitoring of Android Vitals in new releases, it would be nice if a team could receive email, Slack messages, etc. when some metric in a new release is getting worse, e.g. goes over a threshold. Is something similar planned, or could we at least get access to a Vitals API, so threshold? Is something similar planned, or could we at least get access to a Vitals API so we could implement something similar ourselves? So I will answer that question in two parts. So I think to the first part, as I talked about earlier, we do have the concept of anomaly detection to address specifically this use case of regressions against any of the core vitals. So hopefully you heard earlier, and you're going to go ahead and sign up to get. So hopefully you heard earlier, and you're going to go ahead and sign up to get automated email alerts. Your team can get automated email alerts when there is a significant regression of ANRs or crashes. With regards to broader exposure of this data in API, I will say this is definitely a request that our team is very well aware of, and something that we've heard from many of our top developers across the ecosystem. It's something that is definitely under consideration, but I don't think we're in a position now to comment on any potential timeline. The second question up, and this is one maybe I'll hand over to you, Fergus, to take. Second question up, and this is one maybe I'll hand over to you, Fergus, to take. This is another one that comes up pretty frequently. What are the key differences in using Play Console versus Firebase Crashlytics to assess vitals such as app crashes? Maybe, Fergus, we could use this as an opportunity to give an overview of vitals versus Crashlytics versus Firebase, et cetera.
Yeah, sounds good.
Versus Crashlytics versus Firebase, et cetera.
Yeah, sounds good. Firebase now has a tool called Firebase Crashlytics. It used to be independent as part of Fabric Crashlytics. Now that's been brought into Fabric, from Fabric to Firebase. Firebase used to have a crash reporting tool itself. That has been deprecated in favor of Firebase Crashlytics. Now, we believe that both Firebase Crashlytics and the Play Console crash reporting should be used by developers because fundamentally they are reporting on different data sources. So the Android Vitals is reported from users who have opted in to sharing their data with Google. And we report those crashes to you in the Play Console. Firebase Crashlytics reports on the crashes that you have instrumented to report from your application by adding the Firebase Crashlytics SDK to your application. Now, if you have, let's say, for example, a startup crash occur as part of your APK, then you will never see that crash as part of Crashlytics because APK. Then you will never see that crash as part of Crashlytics because the SDK has not initialized yet. And so it's worth your while still checking Android Vitals and Crashlytics. Now, we are working closely with the Crashlytics team to come up with a better unified solution to this problem. But for now, I'd encourage you to use both tools to be able to understand your crashes and use Firebase Performance Monitoring, which is the other quality tool that they have, in unison with the Android Vitals startup time and rendering performance metrics to be able to get deeper insights into your application as well using the Firebase Performance Monitoring. Cool.
Awesome. This is another question that comes in pretty frequently. Can you talk a little bit about direct impact of vitals on the ranking algorithms in the Google Play Store? A lot has been said in your blog posts on Android Developer on the Android Developer blog, but it would be helpful to know for sure. So this is unfortunately one of those questions that I'm going to give an answer that probably nobody's going to love. As is the case with all things Google algorithm, we are unable to be 100% transparent into all the factors that go into any discoverability or search algorithms. But we definitely can say that app quality is one of those factors. And I would say that it's worth bearing in mind that the items within the Play console that we decide to surface that we think are important, there's likely high correlation between that and the things that impact visibility in the store. But at a fundamental level, the real thing is, as long as you're focusing on improving your app quality across all levels, that's what we're looking to use to determine what apps get surfaced in the store. So you should really be thinking holistically about app quality, both in terms of content as well as technical performance. And that's the kind of stuff we're going to surface in the store. I know that's not exactly the answer you probably were looking for to that question. I know that's not exactly the answer you probably were looking for to that question, but that's the truth. Next question, and this one I think, Fergus, I would love your insight on. Our app was flagged with a bad behavior regarding wake locks, but we are an app that plays audio in the background for a long period of time. How should we avoid being flagged for stuck partial wake locks?
Yeah, great. So we have a lot of information available on the Help Center articles for the Play console and the Android developer documentation to help you be able to understand more about what are alternative implementations to wake locks and wake ups for your application. Wake locks and wake ups consume a lot of power for users. And we want developers to switch users. And we want developers to switch to using the newer APIs that we have available to achieve the same functionality where possible. Now, when we talk about the wake locks that are included as part of the core vitals, we're talking about background wake locks. This is where you're keeping the device awake for over an hour in the background. We also let you know when you're using foreground wake locks. Now, what we think developers should do is that you should let users know when you're holding a wake lock. And that's why you should not use background wake locks. So if you create a foreground service, then and users will know that your app is running, and then they'll have the ability to be able to turn it off if they think that it should not be consuming power. But if you're running wake locks in the background and users aren't aware of that, we think that's a major issue, and so that's why we flag it. Hope that answers the question.
Awesome. Another question, do statistics in Android Vitals have influence on app rating? So hopefully that question, I think, was one of the earlier ones that had come in before we'd actually given our presentation. So hopefully it was very clear that there is a strong relationship between technical performance and overall rating in the store. But in case the question was around, are they directly factored in? Is Android Vitals performance somehow directly factored into rating? No, the answer is no. Obviously, the rating is solely determined by looking at the total ratings by users that come into the store. Another question was Another question was, do we have any plans on adding more vitals and analytics on the instant game or apps front? Fergus, I will defer that one to you.
Yeah, great. So we currently support Android Vitals for many different devices. We don't cover every device because the way the data is collected, it only works on certain OS versions. So some of the metrics, for example, crash rate and inor rate, work back to many years of Android versions, whereas some of the metrics like startup time only work for the Android versions that we've shipped in the last year. And so there is not a consistent set of metrics, and we're constantly in terms of the coverage for devices, and so we are constantly adding more and more metrics that we collect from the platform, and as such we are then adding those metrics to the Play console. And so, for example, the new metrics for instant apps and instant games, some of those we can be able to use existing metrics, but some of those we actually have to instrument the platform to be able to get the insights. But some of those we actually have to instrument the platform to be able to get the insights to you that can be actionable to you to be able to fix the issues. And so the short answer to the question is we are working to get you more insights into more parts of your application, and stay tuned.
Awesome. Another question that we got, and this is a very common question, says, I don't see one of the vitals metrics in my Android Vitals overview page. Is something wrong? So quick answer to that is no. We only show data for Android Vitals metrics. If enough data has been collected so it's statistically significant, and we can display it to you in a privacy sensitive fashion. So if you are not seeing a certain vital section, that essentially means that we don't have enough data collected to display it. But hopefully as your app continues to grow, that section will populate.
Yeah. The other reason that could occur for app developers, on top of the two major reasons that you listed, Joel, is when an app does not use a certain feature. So if you don't use wake locks or wake ups, then you won't see information about those in the Play console, because we don't want to distract you with stuff that's not relevant to you.
Awesome. One other question that comes up, and again, this is a common one, says, I'm a game developer. Android Vitals aren't really applicable to me if I use OpenGL. I'm a game developer. Android Vitals aren't really applicable to me if I use OpenGL, right? So that's another one that actually the answer is no. So although OpenGL does prevent us from collecting some meaningful data for a couple of metrics, notably frozen frames and rendering, we are still able to collect relevant data for almost every other metric. And most importantly, those the concept of core vitals, which we hit upon earlier, core vitals equally apply to apps and games, regardless of whether you are using OpenGL or not. Another question, could you say a word on PLR? How many devices are available on the Firebase Test Lab? PLR, how many devices are available on the Firebase Test Lab? And is it Android only, or is it iOS as well? Fergus, do you want to speak to that one?
Yeah, sure. So I was the initial product manager for the pre-launch report, but the product consists of many different parts. And you brought up a few different parts here in this question. So we have the Firebase Test Lab, which is part of the Firebase offering. And so if you go to Firebase and look at the Test Lab, you can see the full list of devices that they have there. And it includes 100 plus different type of Android device models. Now, the pre-launch report as part of the Play console is where we generate a report. As part of the Play console is where we generate a report within an hour of how your app is performing on 10 plus physical Android devices. And we run those devices in different languages. They have different screen sizes, screen resolutions, Android versions. And we then give you a report around crashes and security and privacy vulnerabilities. We do screenshot clustering to show you what your screen look like across these different variations of devices. But the report that you see is limited to around 10 devices. And what we found is that by testing on that number of devices, we actually find the vast majority of crashes. And what we found is that by testing on that number of devices, we actually find the vast majority of crashes that will happen in your application. If you want to test on more devices, I'd encourage you to use the full Firebase Test Lab product. But if you want to just use the free offering as part of the pre-launch report, just upload your APK to the alpha and beta channel, and you'll get the report back within about an hour.
Awesome. This is another question that might be good for you. Awesome. This is another question that might be good for you, Fergus. Why is there a confidence interval on the crash rate over time? For example, are crashes under some sort of sample rate?
So the crashes are from a percentage of your users that are actually opted in to sharing their data, is one part. Another part is that some apps have very few users, and so actually we don't have enough data to be able to make a statistically significant. We don't have enough data to be able to make a statistically significant judgment about whether this number is accurate or not.
Awesome. Another question. Would you consider calculating some kind of rating, a quality rating, perhaps, from all of those metrics? It's a really interesting suggestion, one that I can't say I've heard before, one that I know that we're actively considering. But I think, maybe some way of thinking about that is that the quality performance, as we mentioned, does get proxied somewhat, both in the ratings and reviews. So our hope is that technical quality is still being reflected somewhat to the user within the Play Store. That being said, I think it's a great suggestion and something that we should think about for the future, possibly expanding on. Maybe I will wrap things up with one final question. What would you say about custom thresholds per category or per game resource usage? So for that one in particular, I think, Fergus, I don't know if you're interested in sharing anything further at this time, but I would say that we are always thinking about ways that we can make the information we share to you in the Vitals section more actionable and relevant. And so we are actively thinking about things that we could possibly expose below the category level to make your insights even more relevant. I don't know if you've got anything else you want to add, Fergus.
Yeah.
Insights even more relevant. I don't know if you've got anything else you want to add, Fergus.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer, Joel. I think just building on that, so we have only thresholds for the core vitals. So the 4 core vitals, again, being ANR rate, crash rate, stuck wake locks in the background, and excessive wake ups. So for those metrics, we determined that there's a bad behavior, as in if you're above this number of users experiencing this negative experience, then that's really bad, and that's where we want you to improve. And so, for example, with crash rate, the bad behavior threshold is 1.09%. And so we feel that any app that is above that is delivering a very bad experience to users, and it really doesn't matter what category you're in. However, for the rest of the vitals, like where we have 15 today. However, for the rest of the vitals, like where we have 15 today, for those we provide category level benchmarks today, where you can be able to understand how does your app compare with the other apps in the category, because we feel that you're actually better positioned to actually understand how you're doing relative to your competitors and be able to understand where you have opportunity for investment, then relative to your competitors, and be able to understand where you have opportunity for investment, then for us to make a judgment call for you. And to Joel's point, we're always looking to be able to improve this, and we want to be able to help you be able to understand how you compare with the apps most similar to you. And that's something that you should expect to see some great advances over the next couple of months. Thank you.
Awesome. So thank you so much. We hope that you will continue to engage with Android Vitals, or if you haven't used Android Vitals yet, to go into the console and actively start engaging with it. If you want any more information, strongly encourage you to check out developers.android.com/vitals. Again, that's developers.android.com/vitals, where we've collated a plethora of resources all about the Vitals offering, including some great step-by-step resources for how to troubleshoot common performance issues. And the last thing I would say before the session ends, please feel free in the next couple of minutes to submit any questions, and we'll do our best to review those and use those as we think about how we can improve the Vital session going forward. But on behalf of Fergus and myself and the entire Google Play team, I want to thank you again so much for joining our first ever Google Play App Hub Live. And we wish you the best of success with improving your technical performance using Android Vitals.
Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.